From behind, that snake was also relentlessly pursuing them. To save their lives, they rushed straight into a dark cave. However, trouble did not cease to follow them even there. The interior of the cave was so slippery that it was impossible to maintain their footing. Yet, when death itself is hot on one's heels, who would dare to stop? Somehow, they managed to press onward. Amidst this frantic scramble, yet another peril confronted them. Emerging from the pitch-black darkness ahead, an entire swarm of bats launched an attack in their direction. Consequently, one of the men slipped, but Jack, reacting instantly, managed to catch him just in time. Grabbed hold. He was just in the midst of trying to pull him up when, from below, that very terrifying snake slithered into the cave. At the sight of it, everyone's breath caught in their throats. In that instant, the man's hand slipped from Jack's grip. He plummeted straight into the jaws of that terrifying snake, and the serpent swallowed him whole alive. They had no idea that their fate was about to take such a terrible turn. Just then, the captain, trapped amidst the debris and in a terrible state from the fall, regains consciousness. He immediately tells the pilot to send a radio signal for help. The pilot, without wasting any time, got up and searched for the radio. While searching for the radio, suddenly he heard the sound of something near his feet, as if something was dragging someone. He immediately looked down, and the next moment, his heart stopped for a moment. On the ground lay the freshly shed skin of a very large snake, and scattered around it were large broken eggs. He was just trying to make sense of the situation. Suddenly, a terrifying commotion erupted from deep within the dark forest. The trees began to sway violently, as if some massive catastrophe were imminent, and in the very next moment, emerging from the dense darkness, a truly colossal serpent loomed before him. Pure terror was clearly visible in its eyes, for it had discovered that its eggs had been destroyed, and now it had been driven completely mad. Before the pilot could even begin to comprehend what was happening, the very next instant, the serpent swallowed him whole alive. Meanwhile, the other section of the plane had also crashed onto that same mysterious island where, alongside Jack, several other people had fortunately survived. When they emerged from the wreckage, they were horrified, because the island they had landed on was no ordinary island. All the trees and plants there were strange and scary, coming alive and moving at the sight of them. Seeing this, they were at a loss. They decided to get out. Meanwhile, Jack saw a girl whose friend was trapped in the wreckage. She was trying to pull him out. A piece of iron was about to fall on them. Jack rushed to the scene and saved their lives. All the survivors tried to call for help from the rescue team, but their efforts were in vain because the mysterious jungle, there was not even a trace of a signal of sight that instilled fear deep within everyone. They now felt certain that their death here was inevitable. Just then, a man named Tim appeared. He told the others that if they remained where they were, they would not survive, for the colossal trees and vegetation surrounding them could kill them at any moment. He insisted that they had to find the front section of the plane by any means necessary, so that they could use the radio to summon a rescue team. At that very moment, the man picked up a piece of fruit to eat. The instant he began to consume it, the fruit suddenly exploded like a bomb. The poisonous acid that spewed forth from within the fruit struck him right in the face, resulting in his instant death on the spot. Witnessing the man writhe in agony before dying, everyone was left utterly petrified. However, amidst this chaos, one man attempting to rally everyone's spirits remarked that they could potentially find a way out, as a mountain was visible in the distance. Smoke could be seen rising from that direction. In all likelihood, the forward section of the plane must have crashed somewhere in the vicinity of that mountain. Therefore, they had to find a way by any means necessary to reach that location. No sooner had he finished speaking and stepped forward than, suddenly, a monstrous plant engulfed him whole, swallowing him alive. The sight of this sent shivers down everyone's spines. The sound of the man's bones snapping tore through their very souls. It had become terrifyingly clear to them all. The monster plants will eat them alive if they stay here. Panic spread so much that everyone started running blindly to save their lives. They were all running here and there in fear like blind people, but in the stampede, many innocent people were becoming prey to those monster plants. One by one, the terrifying plants swallowed them all. Amidst this stampede, Jack fell down and found the same insurance paper in front of him. At that very moment, his death had already come before him. Now he thinks that he cannot escape from these monster plants, so without thinking, he runs towards them. He went and stood right in front of it. The plant was just about to swallow him whole. Just then, a boy came leaping onto the scene and saved his life. Somehow, managing to evade those monstrous plants, they all eventually reached the canal. There, a man suggested that they venture back into the forest to save the lives of the remaining trapped survivors. However, having barely escaped death themselves, the group flatly refused to enter that forest again. They knew that if they were to step back inside, those monstrous plants would swallow them alive. Meanwhile, a man pointed toward that very hill, urging them, "We must somehow reach that spot and quickly." Without delay, they all began making their way toward the hill. And now, from here, this was their one last chance to escape. Holding their breath, they pressed forward toward their destination, carving a path through massive boulders. They had no idea that the intense gaze of some colossal entity was fixed upon their every move. They continued to advance. Just then, the two men bringing up the rear heard the sound of something rustling behind them. The moment one of the men turned to look back, something suddenly attacked him, making him vanish in a single, swift motion. When the other man saw that his companion had vanished from the spot, he sprinted toward the rest of his companion, began to explain. However, no one could bring themselves to believe his story. Just then, a man spoke up, claiming, "I know exactly where that man is." But before he could reveal the location, suddenly, that very entity lunged at him, dragged him away, and swallowed him whole. It was then that we realized the thing that had been devouring everyone was none other than a colossal lizard, the mere sight of which made everyone's hair stand on end. The monster attacked them, but somehow, by the skin of their teeth, they managed to save their lives and fled the scene in sheer panic. panic. However, they were now completely trapped, for the entire territory belonged to those monstrous lizards. There were 2 or 3 lizards there. No, rather, it was an entire swarm of them. They were all fleeing in panic. Just then, from behind, that very lizard attacked the girl and began dragging her into its maw. Before it could swallow her, Jack rushed to the scene, grabbed her tightly, and somehow managed to save her from being pulled into the monster's mouth. But in the midst of this, the monster lunged at him and pinned him down. The monster was just in the process of trying to swallow him whole. Suddenly, from above, a second companion of the monster came crashing down. Now, instead of just one, 2 monsters began trying to swallow him. But before they could succeed, a stout man suddenly came leaping down from above and landed right on top of them. Fortunately, thanks to that stout man. But the real trouble was yet to come. As they made their way past the rocks, they found themselves deep inside a field of incredibly dense and tall grass. Fleeing in haste and panic, they became separated from one another amidst the tall grass. They began shouting out to each other at the top of their lungs. Yet, despite their calls, no one could see anyone else. In this moment of crisis, they put their heads together, acting in unison. They all leaped into the air at the same instant. This allowed those who had been separated to spot the others, and in this way, they were all reunited once again. They began to think about how to make their way out of the area. But little did they know that death itself was closing in on them. Now, it was no longer a lizard, but a massive serpent that was advancing toward them. Meanwhile, that same stout man heard a faint rustling sound. Hearing it, he felt a sudden pang of fear. The massive serpent was now ensnaring them in its trap. Slowly, the snake crept closer and closer to them. The sound of its rustling began to instill a strange, deep-seated terror within them. Then, suddenly the snake lunged at one of the men, seizing him tightly and dragging him away from the rest of the group. The serpent held him in such a crushing grip that the poor man could not move a muscle. In the blink of an eye, it swallowed him whole alive. Witnessing this, the others were utterly petrified. Scrambling to save their own lives, they turned tail and fled from the scene in sheer panic. While running, they hid behind a rock. But the huge snake wasn't going to give up so easily until it had satisfied its hunger. It was slowly moving towards them. But unfortunately, a girl's voice rang out. Heard the snake spotted them. Before the snake could take the girl alive, Jack wasted no time, standing in front of death and trying to attract its attention. Seeing its prey slip from its hands, the snake became enraged. Now, before it could eat it, the same fat man took the same poisonous fruit and hit it directly with another fruit. As soon as the fruit collided with the other fruit, one after another, the fruits burst open, and all that poisonous liquid spilled out, landing directly onto the snake's skin. The liquid was so toxic that, writhing in excruciating pain, the snake eventually had no choice but to flee the scene, with its tail between its legs in a desperate bid to save its life. By this time, no one had yet found a way to escape. The darkness of night had also spread across the entire area. Amidst the fear and the deepening gloom, the survivors took refuge in a small cave nearby. Inside the cave, due to the pitch darkness, an elderly man attempted to kindle a fire by rubbing 2 stones together, but his efforts prove futile, and the fire simply refuses to catch. Just then, the man's gaze falls upon the locket hanging around Jack's neck. Consequently, the man asks him for the locket. After rubbing the locket for quite some time, he finally succeeds in lighting a fire. Huddled around the flames, the few survivors began to offer one another support. Yet, a single fear gripped them all. If they ventured outside, the monsters roaming the exterior would surely not leave them alive. However, the truth was that they could not survive in this cave for much longer. Therefore, they collectively decide that as soon as dawn breaks the next morning, they will make their escape. They were still deep in conversation when they heard a commotion outside. Hearing the sound, 3 people came out of the cave. As they arrived, they saw a bright light in the distance. Everyone thought the rescue team had arrived, so they started moving forward without thinking. After a short walk, the light suddenly disappeared into the pitch darkness, and the next moment, a terrifying creature emerged from the darkness and stood behind them. When they looked back, they saw that it was not the rescue team but a huge monster frog. The terrifying creature was using the light on its waist to lure its prey. Seeing the opportunity, Jack and another boy, Romy, ran inside a rock. They hid, but alas, the man with the suitcase was not so fortunate. That very suitcase which he had been guarding more carefully than his own life was now pinned beneath the creature. Exerting every ounce of his strength, he somehow managed to drag it free. The moment he pulled the suitcase, the monster spotted him. The beast clamped its jaws tightly around him. In the midst of this, misfortune struck. The suitcase slipped from his grasp. Upon hitting the ground, it sprang open, and in an instant, the ashes of his deceased daughter scattered into the wind from within the case. The very ashes were the last remaining keepsake of his daughter, a treasure he had cherished even more than his own life, trying desperately to preserve the memories of his daughter. Watching those memories fade away right before his eyes, he broke down completely, and in the very next instant, that creature ruthlessly put him to death. Now, the creature began attempting to force its way inside the rock formation. However, due to the narrowness of the passage, it was unable to squeeze through. The ravenous beast then clambered atop the rock. Trembling with terror, the boy Romy turned to Jack and said, "We won't be able to hold out here much longer. We have to find a way to escape this place no matter what." Romy proposed, "Alright, on the count of 3, we'll split up and run in different directions." The moment the count of 3 was reached, Jack mustered every ounce of his strength and burst out of the cave. But he had no idea that a massive betrayal was about to unfold for Romy himself. Send feedback. He hid inside the rock to save his life. His greedy plan was to have the creature chase release Jack, and he could escape for his life. As Jack ran away, the creature made a huge jump from behind and stood in front of him. Poor Jack was caught between death and death. The creature was right in front of him. The creature made a huge jump to swallow him, but before it could swallow him, a huge snake suddenly appeared from behind and swallowed him alive. Meanwhile, Romy escaped back to the cave to save his life. As soon as he got there, he told everyone a blatant lie that the creature had killed Jack, tore him to shreds. Upon hearing this news, everyone inside the cave felt their souls tremble with terror. They began screaming and shrieking in fear, for they now realized that their chances of survival were slim. Just then, everyone heard the distinct sound of stones shifting nearby. To save their lives, they all scrambled to hide beneath the rocks. Every eye was fixed outward, awaiting the imminent arrival of their own demise. But then, piercing through the darkness, Jack came running toward them. Alive and unharmed, clutched in his hand was that same battered suitcase belonging to the unfortunate father, the sole remaining memento he had left of his daughter. The following morning, trembling with dread, everyone gathered around that suitcase, buried him in the ground, thereby laying to rest the men's final remains. Before any further trouble could arise, they quickly moved on, continuing their journey toward that very same hill. They were making steady progress when suddenly one of the men slipped and tumbled straight down. Meanwhile, Romy's gaze fell upon the hill ahead, the very place from which smoke was still rising. This meant they were very close to their destination. Just as they were about to depart, Jack spotted something half buried in the ground. When he pulled it out, it turned out to be none other than the freshly shed skin of a massive snake. The sight sent shivers down everyone's spines. It meant that the snake itself was lurking somewhere nearby. At that very moment, all the birds in the vicinity, they began to take flight, as if some calamity were imminent. Before they could fully grasp what was happening, the ground suddenly shook, and just then, a truly colossal snake appeared upon the rock. The sheer size of the serpent left everyone utterly petrified. The ground seemed to give way beneath their feet. Before they could manage to flee the spot, the snake suddenly launched an attack upon them. However, seizing the moment, they all scrambled to save their lives by taking refuge inside a rock formation nearby. Yet, the snake exerted its full might, attempting to smash its way through. Now, before the snake could succeed in shattering that rock, spotting an opening, they all began to flee further ahead. Running for their very lives, they scrambled away in a desperate retreat. But that colossal snake, too, he was 2 steps ahead of them. As they continued to move forward, the snake followed right on their heels. To save their lives, they rushed straight into a dark cave. However, trouble did not cease to pursue them even there. The interior of the cave was so slippery that it was impossible to maintain one's footing. Yet, who would stop when death itself was chasing them? Somehow, they managed to press onward. Amidst this frantic scramble, yet another peril confronted them. From the pitch-black darkness ahead, an entire swarm of bats launched an attack in their direction. Consequently, one of the men slipped, but Jack, reacting instantly, managed to catch him just in time. Grabbed hold. He was just in the midst of trying to pull him up when suddenly, that same terrifying snake slithered into the cave from below. Upon seeing it, everyone's breath caught in their throats. In that instant, the man's hand slipped from Jack's grasp. He plummeted straight into the jaws of that terrifying snake, which then swallowed him whole alive. The survivors somehow managed to traverse the treacherous, slippery cave and fled the scene. Moving a little further ahead, they discovered a piece of the crashed plane lying on the ground. This meant that the nose section of the aircraft must be located just a short distance away. Pressing onward, they finally drew close to the mount vent. Upon seeing this, she quickly began to climb up, and after proceeding just a short distance, she discovered the crashed front section of the plane. As soon as she entered the aircraft, the air hostess spotted the pilot. The moment she attempted to lift him, she was utterly horrified, for the pilot had been brutally killed. Just then, her hand accidentally brushed against the plane's controls, causing the aircraft to suddenly spring to life. Fortunately for them, the plane's engine was still fully functional. Amidst this commotion, Jake spotted a radio lying on the ground below. Driven by the desire to retrieve the radio, he quickly began to climb back down. As soon as he reached the bottom, he noticed several massive, broken eggs lying there. They were lying there. He was a little alarmed to see the broken eggs, but the reality was that trouble was looming over them once again. Finally, he found the radio. He wasted no time and turned it on. But before he could send a signal for help, he felt a faint rustling sound. As he turned around, he saw the same huge snake standing above the plane, ready to hunt them. It was the same snake that Jack had thrown the fruit with the poisonous liquid on it. Now, that snake was completely enraged with revenge. Then he saw it, made a fierce lunge, but it failed. Once again, it attacked. However, in the nick of time, Jack grabbed the plane door lying nearby and held it up in front of him. Consequently, the snake was unable to strike him. Just then, the girl also arrived on the scene, wielding an axe. But against that massive serpent, her small axe proved ineffective. Before the snake could swallow her whole, Jack pulled her toward him. Now, both of them were trapped in the serpent's clutches. But the real trouble was yet to come, for in the very next moment, 2 more bloodthirsty snakes slithered out from the darkness. Now, facing them were not just 1, but 3 ferocious beasts that they were were desperate to make it out alive, but now, the countdown to their demise had begun. Yet, just then suddenly that very boy, Romy, cast aside his cowardice and leaped directly onto the roof of the plane. He had resolved that, today, he would atone for every mistake he had ever made, disregarding his own safety. He drew the attention of those monsters toward himself. The monsters too began to advance slowly in his direction. Shouting out, he instructed the air hostess, start the engines at full throttle. The air hostess quickly set about starting the engines, but it would take some time for them to fully fire up. In the meantime, those monsters inside the plane entered, and as soon as it entered, it swallowed a woman whole. Now the snake was about to attack the stewardess. Suddenly, the same fat man intervened, and the snake went inside instead of the stewardess. Romy, standing above, began shouting loudly to attract the snake's attention, causing them all to move toward him. Before they could swallow him whole, the plane's engine suddenly started at full speed, and in the next moment, all the snakes were floating in the air. Unable to bear the air, within seconds, all three were trapped between the engine blades and were torn to pieces. But the one who, as the engine was being started, the air hostess too, was drawing her final breaths, for when Romy had diverted the snake's attention toward herself, one of the snakes had already devoured half of her body. Yet, even in her final moments, the air hostess did not abandon them, a selfless act that ultimately saved their lives though she herself perished. Now, only 3 people remained in that mysterious place. They believed they had escaped the clutches of death, but the true catastrophe was only just beginning. Suddenly, the ground began to shake violently, and tearing through the soil, Kanda, the father of those 3 snakes, emerged. He was so terrifyingly massive that the entire island itself seemed like nothing more than a tiny speck in his presence. He looked no bigger than a matchstick. Without wasting a single moment, the colossal monster lunged forward and, in a single swift motion, swallowed the boy Romy whole. With his body trembling in terror, Jack and the girl scrambled inside the plane to save their lives. But the monster was not about to leave without exacting vengeance for its offspring. It used its massive body to seize the entire aircraft in a vice-like grip and began twisting it as if it were nothing more than a piece of dry driftwood. Its brute force was so immense that the Plan E structure buckled from within, slowly beginning to tear apart. Inside, the 2 of them were frozen in sheer horror. Yet, even then Jack, he did not give up. He immediately grabbed an axe and began hacking the plane in half. The moment it split down the middle, both of them scrambled out of the wreckage. Upon emerging, Jack's gaze fell upon something that was about to completely turn the tables on the game. Right in front of him, he spotted fuel continuously leaking out, fuel that was steadily soaking the entire body of that massive serpent. In that instant, he recalled that man's old trick. Without a second thought, he sprinted toward a cave. Driven mad with rage, the colossal serpent beast began to pursue him. Just as the monster closed in on him, Jack swiftly snatched the metal locket from around his neck. He took it out and began rubbing it with all his might on the stone surface. Within seconds, the locket ignited a fire. Without wasting any time, Jack threw the fiery locket directly at the snake. The moment the locket hit its body, a terrifying explosion occurred. The entire area was engulfed in flames. In an instant, the terrifying monster burned into a raging ball of fire. Finally, the island's largest monster, screaming and writhing in agony, was reduced to ashes. The shadow of death that had been stalking them for so long was gone forever.